There are movies you watch once and forget. Then there are movies that burrow so deep into your memory that certain scenes feel like personal recollections. Moments you'd swear you actually lived through. Forrest Gump is that kind of film. Released in the summer of 1994, it swept the Academy Awards, shattered box office records, and turned phrases like life is like a box of chocolates into permanent fixtures of the English language. 30 years later, people are still watching it, still quoting it, and apparently, still missing things hidden right in front of their eyes. Because here's the thing about Forrest Gump that most people don't talk about. Beneath its warm, nostalgic surface lies a film absolutely riddled with peculiarities. Not just the charming kind, where a fictional man accidentally teaches Elvis how to dance, but the genuinely baffling kind. Continuity errors, historical contradictions, and one massive blooper so brazen, so perfectly hidden in plain sight, that generations of devoted fans walked right past it without blinking. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on all of it. We'll walk through the fascinating behind-the-scenes realities of one of Hollywood's most beloved films, build up the context you need, and then land on that one enormous blooper that, once you see it, you absolutely cannot unsee. So settle in. Because as a certain someone once said, you never know what you're gonna get. To understand why the blooper matters, you first need to understand what kind of film Forrest Gump actually was, and more importantly, what kind of film Hollywood executives feared it would be. When screenwriter Eric Roth adapted Winston Groom's 1986 novel for the screen, what emerged was something genuinely unprecedented. The script asked audiences to follow a man with a below-average IQ through 3 decades of American history, from the civil rights movement to the Vietnam War to the AIDS epidemic, all told from a park bench in Savannah, Georgia. It was sentimental, episodic, and wildly unconventional. Studios weren't exactly fighting each other to greenlight it. Director Robert Zemeckis, fresh off the massive success of the Back to the Future franchise, was the driving creative force behind getting the project made at Paramount Pictures. Even then, battles over the budget were constant. Certain sequences, including Forrest's now legendary cross-country run, were nearly cut entirely because the studio refused to fund them. According to Tom Hanks in an interview on In Depth with Graham Bensinger, Zemeckis was so committed to keeping the run in the film that he and Hanks personally co-financed the sequence themselves, accepting a larger share of back-end profits in exchange. It was a gamble that paid off spectacularly. The film grossed over $678 million worldwide, and Hanks alone reportedly earned around $65 million through his profit-sharing arrangement rather than a traditional upfront salary. The point is this: Forrest Gump was a passion project held together by creative stubbornness, improvisation, and an enormous amount of technical ingenuity. And when you build a film that way, racing between locations, solving problems on the fly, weaving fictional characters into actual historical footage, things slip through. Small things, mostly. But sometimes, something extraordinary slips through. Something that shouldn't have made the final cut. Something that sits in the movie, completely exposed, waiting for the one viewer paying close enough attention. Before we get to the blooper itself, it's worth appreciating just how technically ambitious Forrest Gump was for its era, because the ambition is directly connected to where things went wrong. The film's visual effects were groundbreaking by 1994 standards. Most audiences are familiar with the digital manipulation that placed Forrest alongside Presidents Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon, using archival footage seamlessly stitched together with new material. But the effects work went far deeper than those crowd-pleasing cameos. Gary Sinise, who played the embittered Lieutenant Dan, had both of his legs digitally removed in scenes following Dan's wartime injury. Sinise wore blue fabric wrapped around his legs while performing, and the visual effects team erased them entirely in post-production, creating a portrayal of a double amputee so convincing that many viewers assumed Sinise had used a body double or some form of practical illusion. The effect was achieved through a combination of rotoscoping and early CGI compositing, and it remains one of the more quietly remarkable technical accomplishments in mainstream cinema from that decade. Then there's the feather. The film's opening and closing image, a white feather drifting through the air above Savannah, was not computer-generated as many people assume. A real feather was filmed multiple times against a blue screen, with various takes of its flight digitally composite together to create the smooth, unhurried arc scene in the film. The choice to use a practical feather rather than a CGI one gave the sequence an organic quality that digital effects of the era simply couldn't replicate. The Vietnam War sequences present another fascinating case. The dense jungle combat scenes were not filmed anywhere near Southeast Asia. The production shot primarily on Fripp Island and Hunting Island State Park, both located off the coast of South Carolina. The golf course setting for certain scenes was transformed through a combination of additional palmetto trees, set dressing, and CGI vegetation into something resembling the Vietnamese jungle. It wasn't perfect by modern standards, but in context, it was convincing enough. All of this is to say that the film was an extraordinarily complex production juggling dozens of technical and logistical challenges simultaneously. Continuity, under those conditions, becomes exponentially harder to maintain. And that's precisely where our blooper lives. Interestingly, not every factual inconsistency in Forrest Gump qualifies as a mistake. Some of them are entirely intentional, built into the fabric of the storytelling as a kind of winking acknowledgement that this is not a history lesson but a fable. Take the scene in which young Forrest influences Elvis Presley's signature hip-shaking dance style. The physical performance of young Elvis was provided by actor Peter Dobson, but the voice you hear in the scene actually belonged to Kurt Russell, who had previously played Elvis in John Carpenter's 1979 biographical film. Russell confirmed his involvement in a 2016 GQ interview, revealing that director Zemeckis had approached him because the original voice track wasn't working. The irony, which Russell himself acknowledged, is that when he actually played Elvis in the biopic, singer Ronnie McDowell provided the vocals. In Forrest Gump, Russell sang. The whole arrangement is wonderfully absurd, and deliberately so. Similarly, the film places Forrest at the White House to meet President John F. Kennedy after being named to the college All-America football team. This is historically impossible. The Associated Press did not announce its All-America selections until December 6, 1963, 2 weeks after Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. The film knows this. It doesn't care. The anachronism is a feature, not a bug, because Forrest Gump is operating as magical realism. It's a folk tale set against a historical backdrop, and occasionally it sacrifices accuracy in service of emotional resonance. The same logic applies to the timeline around Jimmy Carter. The film depicts Forrest beginning his cross-country run on what appears to be July 5, 1976. Yet at some point during the run he passes a television broadcasting news of President Carter suffering heat exhaustion during a road race, an event that actually occurred on September 15, 1979. The dates don't cohere. They can't cohere, because the run would need to span at least 3 years to accommodate the historical markers embedded in it. The film essentially compresses and stretches time simultaneously, never fully committing to an internally consistent calendar. These are not accidents. They are choices, and understanding the distinction between intentional historical liberties and genuine production blunders is crucial, because what we're about to discuss is definitively the latter. Every film of sufficient length accumulates continuity errors, and Forrest Gump is no exception. Fans who have watched the film dozens of times have catalogued various small inconsistencies over the years, the kind that make you slap your forehead once you see them but don't fundamentally damage the experience. There are moments where Forrest's hair length changes inexplicably between cuts, a common consequence of filming out of sequence over many months. There are scenes where background extras can be spotted doing identical things in successive shots, a telltale sign of looped footage. The leg braces that young Forrest wears as a child change in appearance between certain scenes, a detail that requires freeze framing to confirm but is unmistakable once identified. Tom Hanks himself contributed an unintentional blooper that paradoxically became one of the film's most beloved moments. The line "My name is Forrest Gump. People call me Forrest Gump" was never in Eric Roth's screenplay. Hanks improvised it entirely on the spot during filming, and rather than cutting or reshooting, Zemeckis recognized immediately that the spontaneous repetition was perfect for the character. It's now one of the most quoted lines in the film, despite being a mistake in the most technical sense of the word, an actor departing from the script. The football scenes, shot partially while Hanks was genuinely ill with the flu, contain moments where his physical discomfort is arguably visible if you know to look for it. Running the length of the field repeatedly while fighting an active illness is, by any measure, not ideal filming conditions, and the strain occasionally registers in his face between the moments of performance. But none of these, individually or collectively, qualify as the massive blooper we've been building toward. Here it is. The one that has been sitting in the film for 30 years. Cast your mind back to one of the movie's most emotionally devastating sequences. Jenny, Forrest's lifelong love and the gravitational center of his entire existence, has just died. Forrest is alone. His son is preparing to go to school for the first time. It is, by any measure, one of the most quietly heartbreaking sequences in the film, and Tom Hanks delivers it with extraordinary restraint. Now pay close attention to Forrest's running shoes. Throughout the film, Forrest's relationship with a particular pair of Nike Cortez running shoes is treated as a meaningful character detail. The shoes are gifted to him, he runs in them obsessively, and they become something of a symbol for his forward momentum through life. The film is meticulous about this detail in most scenes. Wardrobe continuity on the shoes was, by all appearances, a priority. Except for one scene. In a sequence where Forrest is outdoors and the camera captures his feet and lower legs at close range, the shoes visible on screen are not the Nike Cortez model that the character wears throughout the rest of the film. They are a different shoe entirely, with a noticeably different sole profile and a slightly different upper construction. The switch lasts only a few seconds of screen time, which is precisely why it went unnoticed for so long. The emotional weight of the surrounding scene draws every ounce of viewer attention upward, toward Hanks's face and performance. Nobody is looking at his feet. But the shoes are wrong. Definitively, verifiably wrong. And given how symbolically loaded those shoes are throughout the narrative, how deliberately they are referenced, and how carefully the production team managed most other continuity details, the error is startling in retrospect. What likely happened is straightforward enough in the mechanics of film production. Scenes in major productions are rarely if ever filmed in the order they appear in the final cut. When a scene is scheduled, the correct costume pieces must be pulled from wardrobe, verified against continuity photographs, and approved before the camera rolls. On a production as complex and physically demanding as Forrest Gump, with Tom Hanks traveling between locations across the country on a grueling schedule, shooting dialogue-heavy bench sequences in a day and a half while exhausted, the opportunity for small wardrobe errors is significant. The continuity supervisor on any production is responsible for catching exactly this kind of mistake. Continuity photographs are taken throughout production specifically to prevent mismatches between scenes. The fact that this particular error survived not only the initial filming but also the editing process, the director's cut, the studio screening, and the final theatrical release suggests that in the framing of that specific shot, the shoes were either partially obscured, deemed acceptable in the moment, or simply overlooked in the rush to complete the sequence. What makes it genuinely extraordinary rather than merely embarrassing is the symbolic weight of the shoes within the film's own language. Forrest Gump is not a movie that uses wardrobe carelessly. The specific shoes are referenced verbally and visually. They are part of the iconography. And yet there they are, in one quiet moment near the film's emotional conclusion, quietly wrong.